these guys trusted us with their stories. I felt like they trusted me to tell their stories. And the stories, I thought, are stories that everybody needs to experience so that they can understand more of what had happened during that time period. There's lessons to be learned from these stories about war, how it is fought, why you don't want to fight it, and at the same time, just extraordinary values and courage from individuals. So all this stuff is sitting there, and these people had trusted me to do that, and I really felt like I had let them down.
That was Peter Tamte talking about his latest game, 6 Days in Fallujah. We probably had one of our deepest conversations with Peter and lead designer of 6 Days in Fallujah.
We've had a lot of deep conversations.
Yeah.
That was a deep one, though. You're right.
It was, and I was just going to say Peter and Jaime Griesemer, these are two master craftsmen, and they're tackling something very challenging. Both of these guys, known for a long time, pretty instrumental in Bungie's early days. And so it was great getting to spend some time with them and hearing their story. So we're probably going to get rolling with that interview real quick. But Aaron, how's it going? What's happening?
Dude, we kind of talk about this in the episode because Peter, and it was good seeing him again. I hadn't seen him in a long time. Every time I meet that guy, it's an enjoyable experience. Anyways, I've been getting into to disc, like actual games, like actual disc, like not downloading. I feel like I'm going backwards on a lot of things. It's like, my daughter's like, "Hey, I really want this game, Dad," and it's the Rabbids game, from Ubisoft, the new Mario Rabbids.
Oh yeah,
it's like the latest one.
Yeah.
And
those are funny.
Did an update. Yeah, they're amazing art, by the way. And the cheapest place to get it was on Amazon during the Prime deal thing, and it was like $19, and there were all these other games for $19. And I'm like, yeah, let's go. So I just been buying, and I'm in the GameStop club. There's something about the
Of course
discs.
You are.
Yeah.
Of course you are. Yeah. Well, that's
I don't know what it is. Yeah, so I've been
that's
really
good.
having the boxes.
Getting some more
awesome.
plastic in the ecosystem.
No, it's a
job.
collector's
Good
item.
job.
It's a collector's item. But what I wanted to say was,
You'll keep it forever.
There is this indie scene. It's a whole scene I just discovered and I'd kind of seen it in the peripheral, but indie people will make a game and it'll be, digital release. And if it gets popular enough, or even if it doesn't, they'll do a very limited print, like small print run of this.
Yeah. I actually think that's kind of cool with the physical
really
box.
cool, right?
And
it's like the vinyl,
I like that.
like whenever, nobody does, like a lot of these new bands, they don't even have CDs and stuff. A lot of times they just go straight to Spotify or iTunes.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool. That's what I've been up to.
That Stubbs Collector's Edition that I got has the soundtrack on vinyl, which is super cool.
Is it green?
Yeah.
Is the record green?
Oh, shoot. I haven't popped the shrink wrap on it.
That was my favorite thing about vinyl.
Wouldn't surprise me. You know who's on that soundtrack? Death Cab for Cutie.
Death Cab for Cutie, a fantastic band.
And Cake is on that soundtrack too.
Yeah. I have that poster, by the way.
It's a good poster.
I've
I've been a little kind of it's not retro. What is it like when you're doing physical stuff, and not digital stuff? I've been gardening, so my garden is finally starting to happen.
I thought you were going to say, I just said that, dude. You're collecting games too?
No.
You've been doing touching the grass. That's what Kyle said.
Yeah.
Kyle's
I've been touching the grass. It's I am a hopeful gardener. I've been, I grew up, my dad would always have a vegetable garden and he would go bonkers with it, And so I've always tried to grow stuff and with limited success, but this year it looks like it might happen.
What do you do?
There's tomatoes out there already. I got tomatoes.
That's the easiest one.
I grew an artichoke. I just brought an artichoke in.
That's hard to do. That's hard to eat too.
Oh, but so good.
The Pleasure Fest? The Pleasure Fest in L.A.
You talking about Renaissance? Ren Fair?
Yeah. Which is the weirdest name to call it a Pleasure Fest. But at that place, Bill Roper goes there, by the way, one of our previous guests.
Oh, he performs there. Yeah.
Yeah, he performs. Anyways, they have a stuffed artichoke that is amazing, and you buy this like full. Yeah, and that just seems like how many did you get
cutting that
in the crop? Just one. What?
There's like 6 growing out there.
You're gonna cut what out?
The artichoke.
Everything
thing.
we just talked about. What's wrong with artichokes?
Nothing. All right. So
Aaron...
let's
all right. Let's
get
on
to
with the show.
We should get over the show. Before we roll with Peter and Jamie, a shout out to listener Kurt, who won our giveaway of issue number 1 of Cliff Bleszinski's Scrapper, which I believe drops today. And I know Cliff is down at San Diego Comic-Con right now, so if you're down at SDCC, go stop by and say hi to Cliff. I know he'd love to see you. And we also are partnering with High Ground. They make ultra premium keyboards. I have one of them right here. In fact, I upgraded my keyboard last year to a full-size mechanical, and I went over and met these guys at High Ground, and they handed me one of their keyboards, which is, what do you call it when it's
free?
You have no, when it's the keyboard part with it's. My point is that it's smaller than this full size one,
no numpad.
But it's like twice the weight. It is so no numpad.
Sturdy.
It's so solid, and they look amazing. They do these limited drops. They're like
Dreamcast,
collector's edition keyboards.
The Dreamcast one. That one is
I couldn't get you that one, Aaron. I couldn't get you that one. That one is truly gone. It's truly gone. But we do have a limited edition High Ground keyboard that we will be giving away, plus a discount code. So if you want to get your hands on a keyboard, head on over to highground.co. It's higround.co. And the code, clever code, 4th Curtain 10, hit that in there for 10% off a keyboard from High Ground. They're super high quality. I love my High Ground keyboard. And we're giving one away. So follow us on Twitter for the deets on the giveaway. And I can say the giveaway is going to be fun.
Tricky.
Not straight up raffle. Yeah, so follow us on Twitter.
Fun.
And with that, let's roll our conversation with Peter Tamte and Jaime Griesemer.
Wait, don't cut out the artichoke thing.
Welcome to today's episode, everyone. This is going to be a long intro because I've known these two guests for a long time. In fact, I've known Peter and Jamie since the 90s. And I'm really excited to have both of them here with us today, Jaime Griesemer and Peter Tamte. Together, they are building 6 Days in Fallujah. Rewind a bit, and Jaime got his start out of the Bungie fan community, ultimately becoming a designer on Halo and game design lead on Halo 2 and 3. He also worked on Destiny and on Infamous at Sucker Punch. Welcome, Jaime, and with him, we have none other than Peter Tamte. Peter got his start in games founding Macsoft, a publisher of Mac games in the 90s, before going to go work for Steve Jobs at Apple as the director of consumer marketing there. He then started Destineer, although he spent a few years as my office mate at Bungie in between. But at Destineer, I believe this is where 6 Days started. Is that right, Peter?
Yeah, that's right.
That's right. A long time ago.
Yeah, we owned Atomic Games at the time, and Atomic was doing training systems for the Marine Corps and other military organizations, and that's how it started.
I was going to break in during my intro, but you looked so focused.
I was reading.
I wanted to comment too. What were you going to say, Jamie?
Just that I think you've known me probably most of my natural life. Certainly you've known me longer than you didn't know me.
Wow. Well, you have something in common with my wife, so maybe we should all hang out sometime. I don't know.
I was going to interrupt with Infamous. Before, what did you do on Infamous?
Oh, I was the, lead designer there. I
really?
Yeah, built the design team.
That's a great game, dude. That's a really good game.
Just on Second Son, not on the first two. But I was a big fan of the first two. That's why I ended up at Sucker Punch.
Oh, they're all good. Yeah, it's a good series. Sorry. Alex, you were saying something.
I was just going to say the new company's called Victura. And Peter, I think you must have named Destineer as well. Destineer and Victura, pretty cool names.
Well, thank you. Hey.
How do you go about naming a studio? Because I've known you through both of those, and I think you spent a lot of time scrutinizing the name, doing trademark searches, looking up URLs, futzing around with spelling. Whereas I just look at whatever URLs I registered 10 years ago, and I'm like, all right, what's good? So kudos to you.
I remember at Bungie, you kept on talking to me about, Peter, I've got the coolest URL ever, widemode.com.
I think you're not the only person who remembers that story.
That was on another
I must
podcast.
have been very excited about it. Yeah, it was a long time ago. So yeah, maybe we go all the way back to the beginning. And Jaime, I didn't remember this, but were you running a myth site? Is that how we met?
I did, yeah. I ran, and people ask like, "Hey, how do I break into the industry?"
Yeah.
And I get to say that the way I got in was extortion, and that's how we met. Because I ran just a dinky little website called the Myth Grimoire. It was a fan site
That's right.
that started. I mean, right after you guys announced the game, I started the site, and then
Like GeoCities?
it was actually out of my school, like the school I was at, North Park, which Pete and I share that in our history as well, but would give you like it was like 10 megabytes worth of space to serve a website out of, and so I just like piggybacked on there. I think it was a T1 line at the time, but yeah, as part of that, I arranged an interview with former guest Marty O'Donnell, and it was ostensibly about the music for Myth 1. This was after Myth 1 shipped. And just as a throwaway, the last question I asked him was, so are you doing the music for Myth 2? And he said, well, actually, yeah, I just, got in the studio, I started tinkering around, and he it was over email at the time. And then, so that I immediately emailed him back like, well, that's interesting because Bungie has not announced Myth 2 yet. And I don't think they intended to do it on my website. So don't worry, I won't publish it, but maybe I can get a tour of your office. And so then that got me into Total Audio to do a tour there. And then I was like, we're only like 3 blocks from Bungie's office. Like, could I get a tour there? And he was like, I had him in a wrist lock at that point. And so he took me over there, and I met Doug Zartman, who that was the one I was really excited about because he did, the voice. I also met your former guest, Max Hoberman, who eventually was how I got the gig. And I met you too. And I think you were just like, why did you bring this kid in here? Like, what what is he doing here? I mean, I was 18. Like, my mom drove me into the city and was waiting like for me to
awesome.
to get the tour.
That is awesome. That is an example of if you don't ask, the answer's no, right? So why not ask?
Exactly.
So good on you, Jamie. Good on you. And I think it's hilarious that you just referred to Peter Tamte as Pete. I've never been allowed to call him Peter. It's always Peter.
We've been in a foxhole together for a long time. We get familiar.
Call me all sorts of other things.
Edie is the next level.
I mean, you guys must have first met at Bungie, I'm guessing, like Peter when you started.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But you both went to North Park, is that right? Did you go to North Park, Peter? Is that
Different times. Yeah, different times. But that's one of the reasons why I remember Jamie, because we'd gone to the same small private school in Chicago.
Is North Park downtown in Chicago? I don't even know where it is.
North side, about maybe 30 blocks north of downtown.
Yeah,
50
it's
blocks
at the end of the
Like in
Brown
Lincoln
line.
Park?
Was it a high school?
Okay.
Yeah, end of the Brown line.
No, it's a college. Well, now they call it now it's North Park University. They
Oh,
upgraded.
it's University.
Tuition probably went up, huh?
Brown line. That's like the best train to have go to your school. It's the best one. I had it too for the merchandise mart. I used to go. It was just really clean and
Oh yeah.
it was nice. Yeah, the red line was always gross, and then the blue line was like kind of sketch because they went to the airport. Anyway, sorry, we're talking about the trains now. But the brown line was my favorite.
I could talk about Chicago all day if that's. If you just want to convert this to a Chicago cast, I'm down.
Have you been back much at all in
Yeah,
the
my
last,
parents are still
whatever?
there. My parents are still there, so I get out there. Not in the
Chicago
winter
proper,
anymore,
or
Yeah.
a suburb.
Well,
Okay.
my parents live sort of near Joliet now, but I usually get in the city when I go visit.
Wait, did you grow up near Joliet? Because I think Kyle Marks grew up in Joliet, one of the other designers that we work with.
Yeah, I grew up all over sort of south side of Chicago, all the way down
South
to central Illinois. We moved a lot when I was a kid.
Well, that's fascinating. We all have Chicago connection here. And Peter, I'm trying to remember when you and I first met.
Oh boy, Macworld Expo, I bet.
I think so. And let's see, early memories.
Oh no.
I want to hear about when you guys sat in the same room together. Like, what was that like?
Oh, we'll get there.
All day, every day.
We'll get there.
All day, every day,
We'll
and
get there.
everybody tell you I talk loud, I laugh loud, and Alex is like 5 feet away. I mean, it was a big office, I guess.
Well, I mean, so just like back, that was that must have been what, 90, 98, set like 98, 99, 97,
Yeah,
98, 99, right around there.
99 and 2000, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, because we moved to Seattle in 2000, right? So that's when you went and started testing your must have been.
That's when I went AWOL.
Yeah. So that was like, there was internet, but there wasn't this, there wasn't like Zoom or Slack
iPhones.
or whatever. So a lot of business happened on the telephone, like, a phone with a cord on it that plugged into the wall. And I think, if you imagine, like if you go to the symphony, I went to the symphony last year and I saw a pianist, which my kids think is a funny word, who
I was like, why did you say
was
that
just
now?
exceptionally amazing, a virtuoso. Just like, I can't even imagine how much time it took for this woman to get so good at playing the piano. That's Peter on a telephone right there. I'm just a master.
Not anymore. That skill has no use anymore.
That office only had one room with a door that closed all the way, right? So you guys had to share it.
Well, hold on. What's he doing on the phone?
Business. What do you mean
like
business?
dialing,
On the
like,
phone, doing business.
just like moving the
Dialing for dollars. Yep.
dialing for dollars.
Well,
Yep.
I mean, back then, Bungie was a publisher too, so which is kind of unheard of today. Well, actually, I don't know if it's really unheard of because there's so much like live service stuff where you're doing your own publishing. But you've always done your own publishing, Peter. I think that's kind of when you were at Maxsoft and I was at Bungie. I was always looking at what you guys were doing as more advanced. Like you had more titles. You had more distribution, you had more relationships. So it was always interesting. I think you introduced me to the sort of that secondhand market where you have a title that's kind of run its course. And it's like, okay, I got like 50,000 of these boxes. I got to get rid of them. And how to turn that into cash at like $5 a piece or less. There was a whole distribution business around that. And it was like,
Yep.
who would know unless you had Peter's phone number and he would tell you.
Surprisingly, there's still that market still exists, believe it or not. Those distributors,
Really?
some of those same distributors are still. You can still go into Best Buy and a few other places, and then during holidays, you can go into other stores, Costco, Target, and find dump bins filled with boxes with discs.
Really?
In them. Yeah.
Crazy.
Amazon has the Prime thing going on now. I just got 3 games today for my kids. So I get kind of...
Did you download them or they send them to you?
discs. They're going to send them to me.
Discs, yeah. Last numbers I saw it's like something like globally, I think like 30% of console games are still sold in boxes.
Really?
It's like a
30%.
third, something like that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I'm sure it's going
PC
down
obviously
every
is.
year.
Oh, it's definitely going down every year. It's been going down.
There's like a secondary collector market too now. Like this, now it's a hip thing to publish digital only games on Switch. There's like this little market.
Yeah, I have a copy of Halo 1 on vinyl.
Sure.
In my.
You mean the game, not the soundtrack. The
That's
game.
the actual game.
Yeah,
Yeah. Load times are really
Gotta
bad. Though.
load. Yeah.
that's pretty funny. So, Jamie, did you end up starting work on Myth 2, or
Yeah.
did you just go straight on to Halo?
No,
What were you doing on Myth 2?
So Max hired me in to be a tester. I was in QA. In fact, my first Bungie email address was tb_jamie@bungie.com, which I think was Tuncer's idea, and it stood for testing bitch. So I came in right at the bottom of the totem pole for sure.
Ouch.
And then I was testing the multiplayer tools, and that for like 3 days after I got hired, I'm like, testing is hard, so I'm gonna be a designer instead. And I got into the multiplayer
that's
part.
easy.
What?
Yeah. Again, extortion, and fraud. That's how I got started in the industry. But what's really crazy is I was like the contact person for you guys. Had some external people working on multiplayer maps for Myth 2, and that group was Paul Bertone, Chris Barrett.
That's
I mean,
right.
all these guys that are just like they were at Bungie for years and became project directors and all kinds of stuff. Just this crazy little kernel of talent there.
Did you know them
No.
beforehand?
I mean, just from the community, but not
No,
really.
that is the thing though. It's kind of that's something that was just magical about Bungie right from the very get-go. I mean, I joined the company years into its existence, but you walk into Bungie and you're just surrounded by people who are top of their game. But yet at that point, there's not a lot of years of experience, but yet they're top of their game. They were extraordinary. And you think about what those people ended up doing across the next 10 years or so, and it proved they were
incredible
top of their game.
concentration.
And it wasn't one or two of them.
And maybe you can tell us the secret to how you accumulated that group, but
Extortion.
Extortion and fraud, Jamie. Extortion and fraud.
Where we involve extortion, but it's not Bungie extorting them; it's them extorting Bungie.
Well,
That's
I think we were very responsive to passion. Somebody knocked on the door and said, I do remember when, Chimera. I think that was that what it was called? What Bertone and Barrett were working on when they came in and showed their stuff. I remember when Marcus came in and interviewed. He did the interview, and then I don't know if you've ever saw this video, but afterwards he was like, "Oh, in my spare time, I made this little animation for my company," and it was like he was working some glass company, and it was like two dudes on an assembly line take a sheet of glass, throw it across the room, and chop a dude's head off, and we were like, "All right, we'll hire you." It's like just stuff like that. So you can't take yourself too seriously, I guess, but if you're super passionate, it sort of pays dividends. And I think you're right. One of the things that I guess maybe I would say I'm really proud of is exactly what you guys are doing, and what Max is doing, what Hamilton is doing. There's so many folks, Michael Evans too, who came up through Bungie, through all of those independent years where we all worked super hard, and have taken what I think they learned, and they're building their own thing and sort of paying it forward to the industry. I think that's super cool.
I'm gonna blame you for that. I mean, you made it look easy and not stressful and not the worst thing in the world to be an entrepreneur. You concealed all that from us so well. They were like, I don't know, it looked easy. Alex did it, so I'm sure we could do it.
That's called locking the door to the bathroom when you go in there to cry.
That's why
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. What do you think, Peter? What do you think?
It's a good thing that we had a door.
Not easy.
I mean, that was some stressful times for Bungie too. I don't know if you talked about that.
Pretty
on
much
the podcast,
all times had their share of stress, different flavors. Lots of triumph too. But we were navigating, going from one team to multiple teams, going from small to sort of medium size in terms of projects growing. Trying to navigate ship dates
on the West Coast.
Yeah, second office. We had that recall with Myth 2. Those were all big challenges sort of happening simultaneously.
And a problem that was more unique to the time period, but was actually fairly common, which is distributors going bankrupt.
Oh, that's right.
Owing you tons of money.
That's right. I remember Ken Phil went out of business then.
I mean, one of my first things you handed me when I joined was, "Hey, Peter, there's this distributor that owes us 60% of the cash that we earned last year, and they haven't paid us yet."
That sounds like fun.
Call them on the phone.
Can you call them on the phone?
Maybe get in the car. Let's go. I remember there was a distributor down in Champaign who, I think when Software Etc. went out of business, they took the Software Etc's inventory back. They didn't tell us they were doing this. They took they had I don't know how many thousands of copies of Marathon they had on the shelves or whatever when they went out of business. But the distributor, I think, took it back for 50 cents a piece or something. And then they just straight up said, "Oh, we have unsold stuff. We're going to send it back. We want a refund." They were paying $38 a copy or whatever it was. So they sold it, got paid, and then they bought it back for 50 cents and tried to return it to us for $38. And the only reason we knew is because we happened to have hired one of their salespeople who were like, "I know what they're doing."
God, so are we adding racketeering to our list of charges?
Yeah. Well, that's just this shitty side of the business was this whole distribution part and the physical goods. Don't miss the fact. I mean, I miss the physical, have a box in your hands. It's like, oh, this is cool, but don't miss that part of the business. But yeah. So Peter, before you got to Bungie, you were working at Apple for Steve Jobs. How close was your office to his office?
Same room, right?
They shared it.
Same room.
Did you guys share an office too?
I did not share an office with Steve Jobs. I spent a bunch of time in his office, but I did not. No, yeah, right. No, he Microsoft at the time was selling about was by far the largest publisher of Macintosh consumer software. And when Steve got back, he recognized that Apple's future was in consumer. And so that was one of the reasons why he became interested in having me join the team. So I did. It was kind of a culture shock, obviously, going from Apple, which at that point was, still is a very large company, thousands and thousands of employees. I had, my personal office was twice the size of the office you and I shared, Alex. When I traveled, it wasn't a matter of sharing hotel rooms. It was, do you want to stay in this nice hotel or that nice hotel? And then, at get to Bungie, and Alex was not about that.
You get a hotel. It's about as far as he would go.
Yeah, some things never change. Something. But did you interview for that job with Steve?
So and actually, it's kind of interesting the way that came about. So there's some of the other people that worked for Steve recommended that Steve talk to me, and unbeknownst to me, so they Steve began a policy, a thing every year they have a top 100 they call it, which would meet, and Steve asked me to come speak at their top 100 meeting, and I did not know it, but basically Steve's plan was then to interview me right after that on the spot, off guard, right? And so unprepared. And so I spoke, and they had me on a panel. And then afterwards, Steve was like, "Hey, Peter, can you come over here?" And we sat down and talked for about 20 minutes, half hour, or something like that. And he said, "Hey, I'm kind of interested in this. This is an interesting opportunity for us, but I'd really like you to write a paper about what Apple's strategy ought to be in the consumer market." And so I did that. I wrote that. And like a day after I sent it to him, I answer my phone, Peter Tamte. Hi, Peter, Steve Jobs. And right away, I was like, yeah, hey, let's talk about it. So then we talked about that, and I joined Apple a couple months later, something like that.
Wow. I guess if your phone rings and Steve Jobs on the other side, either something really good or really bad has happened.
He's suing you. Did you go to Cupertino? Yeah. Where you living? Did you move out and everything? Or?
Yeah, you Minnesota boy, moved out to the West Coast, right?
Okay. I sure did. I did. And to make matters more complicated, my wife was in her third trimester with our first child.
Okay.
And she wanted to stay in Minnesota to work, continue working in her position. So I moved out all by myself. And she said, "I got one rule, Peter, and that is you better have a house by the time I need to move out there with the kid." And so, which actually is a big challenge in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, I bet.
Right? I mean, housing is scarce. Yeah. It was scarce back then. And the first 3 houses I put a bid in, I lost the bid. Yeah. So, it was actually more complicated of a problem than it might seem. But then moved out to Cupertino, lived in Cupertino, and, just a couple, 2 or 3 miles from Apple's headquarters.
Well, that's everybody in this industry has feelings for and about Steve Jobs, I think. And so getting a chance to work for him must have been very interesting. Do you have any interesting story from something he said, which was like, oh my gosh, I got to write this down.
He wants to know if he yelled at you.
Or if he yelled at you. Or how did you tell him you were quitting to go work for a video game company in Chicago? Yeah. And did he know who we were?
Steve Jobs stories. Yeah, there's lots of Steve Jobs stories. I would say this about him. As far as the yelling at people, the man was passionate. I mean, you talked about that earlier, Alex, that when you saw passion in somebody, you just knew that they were going to take the ball, they were going to run with it. They were not going to say, they were not going to compromise. They were going to make something incredible because they had a real passion for it. And I think that was the source of Steve's yelling might have come from that real passion that he felt for what we were trying to do, and frustration when it was not actually happening. But I'll give you a short, just a real quick story. It actually involves video games as well. So, like in the same week this all happened the same week. So Steve was really pleased with something I had presented to him, and as a reward for that, he was like, "Peter, you want to see the design studio?" And I'm like, yeah, of course, everybody wants to see design studio. So this is Johnny Ives' enclave, where he's basically constructing the way the iMac and all of Apple's other products are going to look, and that industrial design. And so first of all, Steve Jobs and I basically go across this major 6-lane highway to get there, walk across it, and there's cars slowing down. All these people are like, "Isn't that Steve Jobs?" I mean, it's like we're playing Frogger as we're going across this road while there's all these cars coming at us. We get to the design studio, and in the design studio, literally, Steve's looking at this thing, and I watched Steve interact with Johnny Ives. Johnny Ives, of course, is now Sir Johnny Ives. He is the most influential industrial designer of the past half century, for sure, right? And here is Steve giving Johnny feedback about the shade of orange in the tangerine iMac.
Oh, yeah.
And it was interesting to see the interaction there, because Johnny respected Steve's thoughts about why, and Steve had very specific idea about why it was that the orange needed to be a little bit darker or whatever. Okay, so that's one thing. So here he is giving helpful guidance to one of the world's best industrial designers about how to make his industrial design better. Okay, a couple days later, I'm in a meeting with Steve and John Carmack. And Carmack Steve gave Carmack all of the OpenGL, which is a graphics API that is used in all of Apple's operating systems ever since. So he gives Carmack all the documentation, which is hundreds and hundreds of pages. So first of all, Carmack reads all of that night, through the night, and then meets with Steve the next morning and starts talking about all the problems we've got in OpenGL. Okay, so Steve instantly understands what it is that Carmack is saying at a really low technical level, pushes a button and says to his assistant, "Hey, I need to get the guy who's in charge of OpenGL at Apple on the phone." And they're having this 3-way conversation, Steve, Carmack, and the guy whose PhD is basically in OpenGL, at a really low technical level, and Steve is following and giving helpful advice to these two people on that. And then later in the week, Steve is having a conversation with one of the top copywriters for one of the world's top ad agencies about the wording of a paragraph inside of one of Apple's ads, giving that guy actually really helpful advice about how to make that copy better. If anything, that encapsulates my experience.
Just incredible breadth
Steve.
and depth. Although
Cool.
I'm pretty sure "think different" is not grammatically correct, is it?
Come on,
Should be "think
Alex.
differently."
You guys have you guys have just
Come on.
flashed into a Highwire production meeting where I'll say something about how the grenade should work, and I think Steve and Johnny would say, and then Marty will pop up. Well, Sir Paul would think that. It's like, oh my gosh, come on, it's the Hall of Presidents here.
That's hilarious. All right, well, so I think we're getting closer to when your two stories start to converge and overlap. But Jamie,
Yeah, I don't know
Highwire,
what kind of
when did you
mistake
start Highwire?
Peter made to go from sharing an office with Jobs to sharing an office with you. I actually don't know that story.
Yeah, I think his mistake was trusting me. Maybe, I don't know. But did you have to give notice? Did you send an email? Did you walk into his office, give him a call, to talk to his assistant? What happened? How did you just not show up?
It was personal. So
Yeah.
yeah. And you know what, Steve? Steve was always very gracious, not just about that, but about everything after that. I mean, keep in mind, just a couple months after I joined Bungie, after leaving Apple and joining Bungie, I then called Steve and said, "Hey, we got this game, and I'd love for you to be the one who announces it to the world," which of course was Halo. And then, a couple Bungie guys go out there, show him, he falls in love with the game. And then, of course, Steve Jobs is the one that unveils Halo to the world.
Yeah, that's right. That's probably a little known tidbit about that whole story is that Macworld, the demo that Jason did with Steve on stage at that Macworld. that whole chapter of the story. And I guess it really started with that phone call. Thanks for making that call, Peter.
Yeah, what happened after that? Though? There's a lot of weirdness. There's John Carmack, which is like not associated with Mac at all. There's like John Carmack. It kind of went all PC. Then you have Halo, which went Xbox.
Yeah,
all Xbox
how was that phone call? Hey Steve, actually, you know what? We're gonna sell this to Microsoft. How did that go?
It's a Microsoft.
I witnessed that phone call. No, I witnessed that phone call because I remember when we had, that period of time was kind of nuts, Peter. Remember, we went out to go talk to Acclaim. There was this company, Action Ace. There was Gathering. We were having conversations with everybody, and Microsoft was a real conversation. And I think pretty much right after we talked to Ed, you called, I don't know if you called Phil Schiller or you called Clint or somebody over at Apple, basically said, hey, we're having these conversations. Should we be talking to you? And it's like, games,
They didn't take it as seriously, I think, probably. Yeah, I mean, crazy stuff. Industry, it's hard to know at a given time. It's hard to predict how the industry is going to go.
Yeah.
I mean, in the 1990s, early 2000s, nobody saw iPhone coming. Even Steve didn't, I don't think, see iPhone coming at that point. And, of course, it is iPhone that made Apple what they're probably the largest seller of video games in the world.
Yeah, I was thinking about that the other day. Like, what is iOS is probably, like, mobile is over 50% of the games industry, and iOS is probably half of that. So it's like it's a quarter of the video game industry. Probably more so by revenue. If you go by revenue, if you go by users, Android's probably a little bigger on mobile, but by revenue, I think iOS might be a little bit by revenue. So by revenue, it's like,
isn't Steam pretty big?
Crazy. Yeah, but PC is not as big as mobile. So
Yeah,
just interesting.
Console has a piece of it too.
Yeah.
Hold on, before we move on, there's one thing there with like what y'all were just talking about. At the end of that cycle, I remember there was like a season where almost all the dev kits were Macs. Do you remember that for Xbox?
What are you talking about? For Xbox?
They were in the G3 silver cases. They just had Mac cases.
Yeah,
they got
right.
They got like a deal on hundreds of them.
You don't remember that? I was like, wait, this is so weird. It's like it's a Mac, but it's an Xbox, and it's Halo.
I thought the dev kits were green.
So
I guess that was after
after that. That was like
they came out. Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
Do you still have your Jamie? Do you still have your green Xbox?
The one signed by Bill
Gates
Gates?
on it? Yeah, I'm sure he signed all of
by
them
hand.
personally. Funny. Not funny. This is not a funny story. Maybe it's just a story. My house got broken into, I don't know, 15 years ago, and the dudes got caught because they were not smart. But in any case, they're like freaking pillowcase sack, like stereotypical crooks, like in my basement, right? And then I got a big TV down there, and I had just a straight up retail PS2 sitting right next to the green Xbox signed by Bill Gates, and I think they took one look at that thing, goes, "What the fuck is that?" And
knockoff
they grabbed the
Xbox,
PS2.
yeah.
Yeah, they grabbed the PS2. It was like idiots.
I have it right outside actually, because the best thing about starting your own studio is you get to take all the swag that you've gotten over the years and put it out for display. Like, take it out of the basement where you have to keep it and put it out on display.
Yeah. There you go. Well, because you got office space. That's kind of cool. So so when did Highwire start?
Highwire started after I was fired from Sucker Punch after Second Son, and Marty was fired from Bungie after Destiny. We were just sort of like,
"Hey, I feel you, brother. I feel you. I just got fired by EA." Yeah,
I've been fired from every job I've ever had, to be honest. But we were sitting in a coffee shop. We're like, man, like, bosses suck. Like, we should just be the bosses. And it went from that to like starting a studio over the course of, I don't know, 6 months. And so we started it. I know exactly.
Oh, I thought you were going to say 6 beers.
Yeah, well,
6
that too.
Signing contracts and everything.
I know exactly when it was. It's like it'll be 9 years in September, because that's how old my twins are. We started Highwire the same month that my twins were born.
Okay.
Because
Good planning.
Yeah, sleep. Why bother? We already had a house though, Peter. So.
Well, that's cool. And did you start with doing stuff for PlayStation?
Yeah, we had some contacts. I still had a bunch of friends at Sony. Like the split with Sucker Punch was benevolent. Like it wasn't like very super acrimonious. And so I still had a bunch of friends over there, and they were starting up PlayStation VR projects. And we pitched a couple, and they decided they liked one and wrote us a check. It wasn't a very large check at the beginning, but it was enough to get started.
Okay, so you started 9 years ago. Gollum,
Yep.
right? That was the title, PSVR.
And make sure
title.
you say it. Make sure you spell it right, or else the Tolkien people will come after you. We found that out.
What is it? GOLLUM?
That's the bad way. Don't spell it that
That's
way.
the Tolkien.
That's
right?
the
That's
bad-
Tolkien
And
one.
I guess the game that they were thinking of when they hit us with a cease and desist was the game that just came out a couple months ago.
Oh, they should have. They probably should have.
Yeah,
stopped
they should have
back
hired
then,
us.
Huh? Well, yeah, you don't want to say anything bad about anybody. Making games is hard.
It's okay.
Okay, and then when did Pete, Trench Buddy Pete here,
What's next?
give you
after
a phone
Pete?
call?
It is true, by the way, Jamie. Nobody's ever called me Pete until Highwire, but that's fine. I just go with it. And now Jamie calls me Pete. Everybody calls me Pete. But my wife is like, who's that?
Yeah, who's that?
You mean when did Mr. Tamte reach out?
We need to get to a 6 days in the origin of that game, because it goes back, I think, well before when you two met. But I'm assuming, Peter, you called up Jamie to help with the game at some point. In fact, I may have even given you his email address. I can't remember if I was involved.
Yeah. It was. I still knew Marty and Jamie, and had a lot of respect for the work that they had done at Bungie. I knew that they were instrumental in both Halo and Destiny, and I thought it was important that what we're trying to do is very important, and it needed somebody who would take a non-traditional approach to understanding that the primary challenge of 6 Days in Fallujah is to give players this empathy for the experiences of people in war. But if you look at that from a Call of Duty lens or a Battlefield lens or Rainbow Six lens, you're just going to end up with a Battlefield Call of Duty or Call of Duty, right? And what had always impressed me about Jamie and Marty is they were able to take the essence of the emotions and the experience and somehow craft mechanics around that. That's hard to do. There are not many people in the industry who can actually do that in a way that is both compelling and fresh. That is very, very, very difficult to do. And so I give Jamie credit for that. I'll say that right here.
You're still recording, right?
Yeah.
Oh, it failed. It failed.
I'll send you clips. I'll send you
That's the
clips,
pull
Jamie.
quote right there. That's the pull quote.
I told, no more 30 seconds of fun. That Jamie's no longer going to be known by Mr. 30 Seconds of Fun. He's going to be known by whatever I just said. I can't remember. A lot of people think they're being innovative, but their change is just incremental. It's not big enough to really be felt by people in a deep way. And doing that actually takes that insight. But then after the insight, it takes a lot of iteration, a lot of fiddling to actually realize that vision. And I definitely had seen Jamie's ability to do that. I've been able to work with, one of the benefits of, Microsoft, we brought a lot of games from Windows to the PC, to the Mac. And that gave me access to a lot of the way that a lot of the biggest game developers at that time thought about video games and thought about innovation and what they were doing at that time. And Jamie is in that league. And so I thought, if we're going to really try to make an impact with 6 Days in Fallujah, that's the kind of thinking that we need.
Which is funny,
And
because
so I'll give Jamie credit.
Alex gave you our contact information, and we turned you down almost immediately, because we had just signed Golem. We were like up to our eyeballs in what we wanted to do in VR, and so I think the first and second time you approached us, we were like, it sounds like an interesting project. We just can't right now. It wasn't until the third time you came back and we were like, now this makes sense. So that's persistence as well too. None of this stuff happens easily.
with that persistence.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I mean,
Absolutely.
talk about that a little bit, because if my memory is right, this is the second development effort to bring this game to life, and it started long ago. Maybe even if I don't know if I have the dates right, but work on this project originally start 20 years ago.
Almost. So
15?
it was, about 18 years
18
ago.
years
Yeah,
ago.
I mean, right. So the project began, I mentioned earlier that Destineer had acquired Atomic Games, which was known for the Close Combat series, really some of the very
Keith
first
Zabalui.
real-time strategy games.
I
Yes,
remember
that's
going to
right.
visit Keith down in Houston, your neck of the woods, Aaron.
Yeah.
That's the only time I've ever been to Houston.
You're going to come again. We'll have some barbecue ready for you.
So through that work, we expanded that work and began working with a lot of the organizations within the military community, and that got us very close to these guys who the Marine Corps would send Marines who were right back just weeks after they got back from combat engagements. They'd send them to our offices so that they could be subject matter experts for us and really help us make the training systems that we were creating work well. And I got to know a number of these guys very well, and one of them was blown up by a mortar in the battle for Fallujah. He's, within just, seconds to a minute of bleeding out on the battlefield. When one of his buddies got him, patched him up. He goes to a hospital, the field hospital, then a hospital in Baghdad, then a hospital in Germany, then a hospital in the United States. And, that takes about a month or so. And then he called me and he told me these stories of these things that had happened during this battle. And I was embarrassed because I had not heard a single one of them. And I was really knowledgeable about military stuff, but I hadn't heard a single one of these extraordinary stories as great as any in history, and yet nobody knew about them. And knowing that I was running a video game company at the time, his name is Eddie Garcia, as a sergeant, and Eddie said, "Hey, Peter, would you be willing to tell these stories through a video game?" And I immediately said yes, not fully understanding everything that I was saying yes to at that point. But I just heard these stories, and I'm like, yes, somebody's got to tell these stories. So we began development of that later that year, probably about 7-8 months. We did a bunch of research first. 7-8 months later, we started development of it. This would be late 2005. We pumped millions of our own money into the project. And then Activision releases Call of Duty Modern Warfare, the first one. It sells $1 billion, and all the budgets in military shooters go through the roof. So we, at that point, knew we had to partner with somebody. We partnered with Konami. Konami agreed to fund the second half of the game. Konami announces the game in 2009. Internet explodes.
Yeah, I remember that.
There's people are just, on one hand, you've got
It
people
explodes
who are very
like
supportive of what we're
both
doing.
ways, right? Like, oh my gosh, this is super interesting, and oh my gosh, this is terrifying.
This is exactly what happened. Both.
Yeah,
We
it
got
was in
both reactions.
everywhere. I remember that. That was when Kotaku was like a story
yeah,
every day.
I mean, it was on MSNBC.
I mean,
Like, it wasn't just.
Yeah,
it
was
broke
on
out of
everything.
the.
it was
gaming
everywhere.
industry.
I mean, NBC was so anxious for an interview with us on that. They literally called our creative director's parents because there's the only name in the phone book that they could find to try to get to us. And ABC sent one of their top journalists and a whole crew to our studio for an entire day. Fox had us on all their shows. I mean, it was really a big deal at that time. And again, asking this question: should a video game tackle such a serious thing? And unfortunately, in Japan, the Tokyo newspapers were asking, why is Konami getting involved with this American war in Iraq? And that's kind of spun that story that way. And so Konami pulls out. I'm literally on a rental car bus, and I get a phone call from the VP at Konami who says, "Peter, are you in a place where we can talk?" I said, "Well, not really. I'm in a rental car bus right now. I'm going to the airport, coming back from the airport." And he said, "Well, I got to tell you anyways, because it's going to be on the news in about an hour." So anyway, so they pull out. And, we effectively ended up having to wind down that studio because of it. And, packed everything up on some hard drives, put the hard drives in a safe deposit box. And knowing that at some point, here's the thing. These guys trusted us with their stories. I felt like they trusted me to tell their stories. And the stories, I thought, are stories that everybody needs to experience so that they can understand more of what had happened during that time period. there's lessons to be learned from these stories about war, how it is fought, why you don't want to fight it, and at the same time, just extraordinary values and courage from individuals. So all this stuff is sitting there, and these people had trusted me to do that, and I felt like I had let them down at that point. I really felt like I had let them down, and so I ended up building a productivity software company, sold that company 3 or 4 years later, took the money, reinvested it in 6 Days in Fallujah. And a little bit later, hooked back up with Jaime and Marty and a collection of very talented people that they had assembled at Highwire, and basically began development all over again. Obviously now we're 10 years later, right? So there's, all that technology that I had to put in the hard drives and safe deposit box.
We couldn't even open some of those files. We were like, okay, let's look at what are we building off of?
Yeah, they were probably on like jazz drives or something like that. Peter, it's pretty moving. I was goosebumps listening to you tell the story about Eddie Garcia. It was Eddie Garcia, right? Mm-hmm. Did I get that right?
Yeah, right.
Just having him tell you his story. And I know, I've known you for a long time, and I do remember, I think we went and had lunch out in Pasadena when you were thinking about, what am I going to do next? Yep. And you told me some of that as well, about just wanting to be able to tell like firsthand account stories like that were real. And that does seem really powerful. Like Jaime, when Peter, you said you were like, Peter called you, I had to call you up 3 times. And I could imagine, maybe, I don't know, I could maybe imagine what was going through your head each time, but like what was going through your head each time when he kind of described what he was trying to do? Like the first time it sounded like, well, I'm not available. But like by the 3rd time, when you were like, "Hey, maybe we should have a real conversation about this," like what?
I had to.
Your internal reaction?
I had to work through internally, like what even was on the table, right? Because I think when anybody hears the elevator pitch of, "Hey, it's like Call of Duty, only real stories," that's a difficult concept to wrap your head around, and it is fraught with peril. Like there are so many ways to do that game wrong, and there aren't any examples currently of nonfiction war games, right? That's just not a thing. There's tons of fictional war games that are set in real events, but the characters are always fictionalized. The missions are always fictionalized. They're essentially war movies, right, in video game form. Right. And so I think the first couple of times I had it in my head of like, wait, we're going to try to compete with Call of Duty with 1/100th of their food budget as our entire budget. And we just have really good reference, right? We have these interviews, we have all this material, we have really good reference. And then at some point I started thinking back to my own experiences. So when we were finishing up Halo 3 and starting to like do multiplayer betas, I actually got the opportunity to go on a USO trip to Iraq. Like they took a few of us, put us on a plane, flew us to an army base in the like outside of Ramadi, and then put all these Xboxes on Blackhawks and flew them. I mean, it was, looking back, it was a pretty insane situation, but I ended up in the middle of Iraq, in a converted mess hall with 24 Xboxes, 24 TVs, and 24 copies of the Halo 3 multiplayer beta. And these guys would go out on a mission, go out on patrol, they'd come back, they'd lean their M16 up against the desk, play Halo for 6 hours, then, pick the rifle back up and go straight back out. And what was amazing about it was they had enough internet they could play with some of the testers back home, and these guys would just get destroyed. Like their combat training did not translate to Halo at all. And so I would talk to them and I'd be like, well, what is it? Then they're just like, well, the guns aren't right, tactics aren't right. Like the things that you do to win in Halo would get you killed immediately on any kind of modern battlefield. And so even back then I had this germ of like, what would it be like to make a game that was mechanically designed so that those guys would have an advantage and not the teenagers with really quick thumbs, back home. And so sometime between the second and third time that we were approached, I started to think, what if I stop thinking of this as a Call of Duty game? I stop thinking this is like basically all first-person shooters are Doom with a different skin. Like I stopped thinking of it that way, and I started thinking like, let's really go back and reinvent first-person mechanics based on like interviews and all this incredibly authentic footage that existed. And we don't try to make up a story. We don't make up characters, and we're not, making a war movie video game. Like we're just literally trying to make almost like a documentary with playable sections. And that's what really clicked it for me to like, that's an interesting project. I would love to play it to, I got to work on it. In fact, I don't see anybody else being able to execute this like the way that I now see that it could be done. And so like, let's do it.
So you had a very intellectual response to the design challenge, or just like the idea behind trying to innovate, create something new.
It was very much a professional challenge of like, can this be done?
Peter, you said earlier, you were saying how one of your goals was, or at least part of the vision is, you said the word empathy. And it made me wonder, like, I'm guessing you guys have, the two of you have, maybe it's a list, or it's back in the old days, we would have the shit that rocks list and the shit that sucks list, which was our 20-year-old version of a vision statement, I guess. But so do you have like some guiding principles of here's what we're trying to deliver? Like, if we look at a razor for choices, we kind of fall back to our vision, which is encapsulated by these ideals or something like that. Do you have that? I'm curious.
Yeah, so I can answer that from a higher level, and I know Jamie can answer from a more mechanical. But it's an interesting phenomenon. I'm gonna toss a name out here that's gonna freak everybody out. But Elon Musk tweeted the other week.
You got to narrow it down. He tweets so much.
He tweeted the other week. He said something about the diplomats are the ones that always start the war, and the military are the ones that always say we don't want to start the war. And although I think he got it a little bit,
it was pithier.
It's pithier, and it's not exactly accurate, but fundamentally the concept behind it is that those people who have been in a war know exactly why you should not start a war. Okay, the battle for Fallujah started. So the battle we're tackling is the second battle of Fallujah. The first battle of Fallujah should not have happened. If you go back into history, remember that there were 4 contractors, American contractors, who got hung from a bridge. They were brutally murdered, beat to death on the streets, and then hung from a bridge in Fallujah. And that video of that circulated around the world, and it created an emotional reaction across America. Pax Americana. Nobody can do that to Americans. We want revenge. And so the public pressured the administration, which was also all too eager to go in there and show them who's boss. At that time, General Mattis and many of the other military leadership said, the very last thing you want me to do is go in there and take the city. Trust me, this is a disaster. Please do not make me take this city. But because there was so much public pressure, the administration did it. They go halfway through the city, and of course, it's a humanitarian disaster. It's a humanitarian disaster to try to send a military into a city to take it door by door. It's disaster. They get halfway in the city, and they could have kept going, right? I mean, they're halfway through the city in 4 days, and they're told to stay in place, and then they're forced to withdraw because of the humanitarian crisis
the completely foreseeable humanitarian crisis.
Yeah, it's a foreseeable humanitarian crisis. And then what happens? They pull out, and who takes over? Well, the guy who takes over is Abu Zarqawi, who at the time was running an organization called Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which changed its name in 2006 to ISIS. So you think about what General Mattis said to the political leaders before the first battle was, he said, first of all, we know who did this. We can go kill them. Why don't you just make me go kill them instead of taking this entire city? Because if you make me take this entire city, you're going to have a way bigger problem than you started with. So now you've got Abu Zarqawi, and you've taught him and a whole collection of people that a terrorist organization now no longer is limited to launching attacks on civilian targets around the world. They can actually take and hold territory. This is the lesson that they learned in 2004 in Fallujah. And then when the United States withdrew from Iraq in 2011, what happened? Those very same people went and started taking territory across the entire Middle East, creating an absolute disaster. So here's what I think. I was one of those people at the time in 2004, after those 4 contractors were hung from a bridge. It was in front of the line saying, go take that city. But what I have learned from studying this war is that the military people who have experienced war have experienced and had created insight for themselves that many of us need to understand. And it's not just from there. You go all the way back to what von Clausewitz was starting to write about 250 years ago. It's talking about exactly the same thing, but year after year, decade after decade, country after country, nobody really understands this, that there are realities of war. And the only way I think that we can really help broad population understand those realities of war is through empathy. It's by putting them in that situation and showing them that that there are only 3 bad options here. No matter what happens, it is going to be difficult for you. It's going to be difficult for the people you're with. It's going to be difficult for the others. Eddie Garcia, the Marine who inspired this whole thing, actually encapsulated this concept in a single sentence, 2 sentences. He said, "There is no such thing as a kinder and gentler war. If you are going to fight a war, you have to fight it to win. And that is bloody and disgusting and horrible. So you better understand that before you start, because the worst thing you can do is get halfway in, because there's no such thing." And when you think about America's experience and the West's experience with Iraq and Afghanistan across the last 20 years, I think that's some really very, very good advice for us to understand. But how do you understand that, right? You can't listen to somebody on a television, right? You can't watch somebody else's story on a TV screen, right? You've got to experience that for yourself.
To kind of approach it more from the mechanical aspect. Like I remember one time, it was after Microsoft bought Bungie and moved everybody out. And I was sitting there, and I was like, it was like late at night. It was after dinner, and I was just like driving a warthog across these green rolling hills, and this banshee comes flying in, and then I like took a jump and I landed on a grunt, and then like the AI all worked, and I'm like, oh man, this concept works, right? I had a really similar experience with 6 Days, where we had one of our first public playtests, and we got these 4 people that were, basically off the street, and they're playing and they're figuring out the mechanics. They start to achieve some success, and then one of them says, "Why would anybody do this? Like, I can't believe that we sent anybody in to. This is horrible. This is an untenable situation. There's no way to do this right. It's terrifying and horrible. Like, this isn't good." And I'm like, yes, this concept works. Like, the only way, like, if you watch one of the famous Chris's, like, in a war movie, kicking in doors and being all awesome, that does not give you the right impression. But if you have to sit there and make the decision, I'm going to kick in this door, and I don't know what's on the other side, and it's probably going to try to kill me, but maybe it is a non-combatant, like maybe it's a civilian, you're in those shoes to the point where you get that empathy connection. And then when you see the video of the guys talking about what they went through, you're like, okay, yeah, I understand where you're coming from. Like, this was a fiasco.
Like, impossible for on an individual basis for everybody involved in an impossible situation. Obviously, the passion that both the two of you have for this, Peter, you started this 18 years ago, and you have invested so much of your career in this. And Jamie, you've obviously given this a tremendous amount of thought from a a design perspective and listening to how what your vision is for what you're building, like what the value this game has for people, the world, whatever. I know, Peter, from talking to you that I'm unsure if people see it that way. Just like
Right.
like the press, like it sounds like, game press is afraid to talk about this game. And I think for a lot of the reasons that we were just talking about, but like what are your guys' thoughts? Like the game is in early access, so people are playing it, people are talking about it. The press I saw one article from Polygon, which I think was sort of like almost like an editorial of like, should this game be something like that?
Sure.
But like, what's the reaction been? Like, what is it match what you were kind of expecting?
There's almost like three camps out there. One group that doesn't think that we can do the subject justice, and we need to prove that to
Which,
them.
by the way, like every other day, I'm in that camp. Like this is an extremely difficult thing to pull off.
It's very hard. It is. That's a legitimate
Yeah,
concern.
100%
It's a legitimate
understand
concern.
that skepticism.
There's a second group that understand, I think, what we're trying to do, but feel like they're getting shouted down by other parts, and they're afraid to express themselves in with their peers. And then there's a third group that just frankly has a really negative attitude towards the American military and is very anxious to call them war criminals and views the entire Iraq war as a war crime and anything and views us as, by telling these people stories, as forwarding American propaganda about a war crime. So when I look at those three different groups, like Jamie said, I think I've got some respect for people who are like, respect what you're trying to do, don't know if you're going to be able to pull it off. That's a legitimate question to ask. Second group, being afraid of their peers, I think they need to have more courage. Third group, want to shut us up because they don't agree with what they perceive to be a political perspective, which they don't even understand what our perspective actually is, but nevertheless they want to shut it down. That's not legit. I mean, I'm very frustrated that the world's largest gaming website refused to cover our announcement of going into early access because of that
You
reason.
still made like top 10 though, didn't you?
We made number one.
Yeah.
We made number one. So when we launched into early access, we were the number one best-selling PC game in the world at early access for the first weekend.
Yeah.
That says something about what consumers are interested in. Yeah.
But listening to how you, I don't know. I mean, I know you guys, right? So I believe you. And listening to your vision and what you're trying to do, this is not a pro. This is the opposite of a pro-war piece of art. If it's propaganda, war is bad. Like, go experience this. It's impossible. The world shouldn't be doing this. That's what I heard. I don't know if that's what you're trying to say.
Yeah, it is. And I don't know anybody who has actually fought in a war. And trust me, I know a lot of people who have fought in war, okay? Hundreds. I don't know a single one of them that thinks war is good, let's have more of it. Every single person I have talked to, of the hundreds I've talked to, who have been in combat situations and seen their best friends die and seen the problems with that it creates on the people who are involved.
Especially
none of
this
them want
forever war
Not a
where
single
the
one
goals
of them.
are ambiguous and the sides are blurred and
it goes on and on.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But here's the thing. That needs to be separated from the courage of individuals who are put in those circumstances. Okay. And I have story after story after story of things that happened during the Battle of Fallujah where individuals showed compassion and courage that defies any logic. And I want players to get to know those people and what makes them tick and what made them do these superhuman things under the worst of circumstances, while at the same time understanding that the circumstances that they were put in were difficult to the point that we need to educate democracies about the costs of these emotional reactions to terrible events. So if that all makes sense. So on one hand, I think it's 100% possible for us to say to people, please understand and I hope everybody understands the real tragic costs of war, because war is terrible, but it is sometimes necessary. But you better understand where that line is.
Other kinds of media do a really good job getting across some of the horrors of war. So, like, we're not really trying to duplicate the things that movies or books or whatever are good at. Like, what we're trying to give you is an insight that you cannot get from a movie, which is the mechanics. Like, what are the trade-offs that you're making, and how fast you have to make those decisions in the situation that you're in. I would add a fourth category to Pete's categories of press, which I didn't really understand until after we were in early access, which is I think there is a group of gamers that do not want games to include this kind of exploration of history and reality. Because, like, I read a piece that got published recently, and it was like, the game is competently made. I'm like, great, competent, we're awesome. It's horrifying. I'm like, yeah, combat in a city is horrifying. It's great. It's incredibly difficult. I'm like, sweet. Like, that's in the design document. When you complete a mission, like, it's really exhilarating, but it's also incredibly fatiguing. Like, this game is intense in a way that all the other games I play are not. I'm like, that's great. And then they ended with, it really made me think differently about the games I like to play that are fictionalized. And I won't name any names, but you know the litany. That the thing that they're describing isn't really war, and it makes me wonder, like, is it okay to enjoy those games? I went, awesome. Like, we've broken through. Like, there are games out there that take historical events and strip them of all context and just present the visuals in a dramatic way that are doing so much damage to how people understand how modern warfare is prosecuted. But then the last line was, and I don't really like that. I was like, okay, we made you think about your hobby. I apologize. Like, move right along. Go on and play your board games where you get to, like, snipe people. And it's in a fictional country, so that means none of it matters, and morality doesn't have to, like, apply.
Alex and I were talking about that earlier.
I was going to say, Aaron and I were talking about this before you guys got on, just about if you really think about it, if you really think about the subject matter of, like, what, and it's not just your game. You think about Call of Duty, you think about Battlefield, you think about the modern military simulation. If you really think about what's happening there, it's like an experience that nobody would want to do.
Yeah.
But at the same time, by making players do it, you get empathy for them.
What Jamie just described is like what you're building has made,
Exactly.
in that case, had made that person think about what's happening in these games, like the subject matter. And they questioned whether they were okay with it. And it sounds like that's kind of part of what you're trying to do, is to make people
It's kind of part of what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
We're trying to make people think about that from that perspective. But two things happen in that. They're thinking about this question of, oh my goodness, this these are some realities of war that I think we all need to understand. But then number two, wow, I have a deeper level of respect for the individual that actually had to go through that with honor, try to do that honorably. I think that there's a two-part of it. I think that's important to us, and then to actually see that individual in a video interview, some of which were captured just months after the battle, talking about that experience and what was really going through his head at that time, and the difficult decisions that he had to make.
How much of that, like, the real stories from real people, how much of that is going to be in the game?
So there's really fundamentally two parts of the game. One, you've got the cooperative multiplayer experience, which is based on those true stories, but is not a recreation of specific events, but is experientially very, very much what these guys have explained to us. And then you've got the story campaign, which we have not started releasing yet. And the story campaign will be actually recreations of those specific stories.
It's so, when we just had to remind ourselves of this again yesterday, where we're like, okay, we're gonna work on this new feature or mechanic or AI ability or whatever. We have to start at an interview. Like, we have to start with some real thing that really happened. We can't just make anything up. It's like the opposite of the Halo days, where it's like, well, I don't know how this piece of equipment works. It's a gravity like launcher.
Yeah, and you would design it, Jamie. You would just be like, well, I think it should work.
Yeah,
like this.
I want to achieve this effect, and so I will design the fiction to like support that effect. But for us, it's like, well, we would love to add this thing, but it's not authentic. It didn't really exist. That's not really how it happened. We have to figure out what parts we can recreate, and some parts are much harder to recreate, and so that's taking, that's why those are not in there yet.
Okay, guys, we've kept you like 20 minutes over.
Yeah, people are going to look at this in their podcast app. They're going to be like, 2 hours, man, skip. I'll just go to the next one.
No, it's good.
Well, honestly, this conversation was a little different than I was expecting.
Yeah.
For me, it was really good to hear you two talk firsthand about what you're building, because it will make people think. There's not a lot of games that do that. Congratulations on getting into early access. I know it's been a long time coming. Looks like the game is sitting around, hit number 1. You're at like an 86%.
87.
Thumbs up.
We clicked over to 87 yesterday.
87. Stop watching it. Let it sit.
Knowing what you guys are, like, if you just think about the game and experience and what you've built with the randomly generated levels and how your co-op mechanics work, there's definitely a lot of really interesting
absolutely
stuff
the reaction of the community and all the posts from veterans talking about the authenticity, like that's fresh fuel for the fire for us. So it's been great to get it out there and in people's hands and start getting that feedback.
Yeah. Cool. All right, guys. Thank you so much for spending the afternoon with us. And I'm sure we'll see you soon.
Yeah, it was nice meeting both of you.
Indeed. Thank you.
Cheers. Great to catch up with Peter and Jamie and hear their story directly. They haven't gotten a lot of press coverage for 6 Days in Fallujah, and you and I have talked a lot about why. I can understand how media is afraid to cover it.
It's a big topic.
But our podcast is really about people. It's about the people who have helped build this industry. Jamie and Peter have been pretty influential in shaping the course of this industry. Yep. And what they're doing, I think, is pretty interesting, and I think their intentions are pretty good. I didn't know what to expect with the conversation.
Yeah, neither did I.
And I learned a few things, and it totally made us think. I know, because you and I talked about it for a couple hours after that.
We've talked a whole lot. Yeah, we've recorded and unrecorded and did this and this.
I'm good friends with these guys. I'm an advisor to Peter, so I'm just going to kind of leave it there. I think we accomplished our mission of bringing their story to our audience.
I agree.
And was happy to do that.
Yeah, and I started out a certain way. And I actually challenge and encourage people who have an opinion on this to really think about it and see. And they kept using the word empathy. You never hear the word empathy in video games in the same conversation. Like that's very rare. And I started to empathize with the Iraqi people, or people that have an opinion, and the soldiers that want to tell their story. Like, there's a lot of thinking there. And, I hadn't done that before. I had a very surface level opinion on the thing that kind of made me feel comfortable in my mind. And then I decided to just chew it out with you. You and I had a lot of conversations about it. And I like that I went through it and I'm at the end of it. And yeah, I think we did what we were supposed to do with this episode.
All right. Well, with that, thank you, Aaron. And thank you, listeners.
I want to hear more about these artichokes, actually,
Maybe I'll post a picture. I'll tell you, I think we're gonna cook one tonight. I'll let you know how it comes out.
Let me know the recipe.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening.
So thanks, everybody. Yep, follow us on Twitter for the Deets on our giveaway.
Join the Discord.
That's probably going to be a regular thing we do. Yeah, head on over to our Discord, and we'll see you next time.
Cheers. Thank you for listening to the Fourth Curtain Podcast. To get a peek at upcoming episodes or to send in questions to the show, visit our site at thefourthcurtain.com.
And be sure to follow us
M82V
on Apple Podcasts,
Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again for listening.